Welcome everybody. Yes, it is Ask a Philosopher. I know it's been a while. Don't blame me. Blame that guy over here. He's been busy. He's like one of the most sought after personalities on YouTube at the moment, or something. It's like you try to get a hold of him, and Nick's like, "Who you again, Steve? Is that you?" No, I did get a hold of him, and we are going to do an Ask a Philosopher today. But anyways, Nick, you've been, like I said, you've been busy. But what's going on with you, man?
I have. Well, a lot of stuff. I wanted to do some of my own writing again, but I haven't been doing that for a while. The biggest thing, of course, is In Time, which is the YouTube channel. I've been working on that. It's been going very, very well, and I enjoy it. But oh dear Lord, is it a commitment? So we try to do a guest or two every single week. We do the breaking news. So on weeks that are pretty news heavy, oh my God, it's like so we actually cover the breaking news. As Ansgar and I were doing it a couple of weeks ago, especially for the Iran story. And it's like every time, we'll try to go to sleep and then the phone rings and something's going on in Iran. So on top of staying up all night to cover that, and we broke a few stories before the mainstream media. We beat CBS, CNN, ABC to the first rocket attacks in Iran, and we also accurately predicted it was a friendly fire incident that took the plane down there. We had on A2T Productions, in fact, who had specialized in anti-aircraft, and he was just like, "Yeah, this is how we would know, and this is what it looks like." And that was a lot of fun. So I'm enjoying it. It's In Time. If anyone wants to go check it out, In Time Show on YouTube, just In Time Show, youtube.com/In Time Show. Come check us out. But it's been marvelous. I've been really enjoying it. But holy
Yeah, it's
smokes!
a lot of work. People don't seem to appreciate how much work goes into putting these productions in. You have to get a hold of people. You got to do research. It's not like just, hey, you got 2 minutes, let's go live. I know that you put a lot of prep work in, and I know there's been a lot of changes going on as well. But the best everybody over there. One of my favorite channels. You guys have been exceptionally good to this channel, and mazel tov to you guys. But
Oh, thank you.
a couple other things. Before we went on air, we had a little disagreement, Nick and I, and you know how I am. You disagree with me and you're gone. So I'm gonna have to boot him here soon because
I'm
according to Nick, he drinks Monster and I drink Rockstar. I don't think that we're compatible.
We're not.
Yeah,
It's
so
yeah, but
you're just
oh, it's
objectively
gonna be
wrong.
another of my channels you've hijacked, Steve.
I, I'm telling you, Rockstar is better. It's sugar
No, I'm
free,
sure actually it
caffeine
is.
free,
It's
zero
really fun.
calorie. It has low. The monsters are too sugary. I mean, like
Wait,
one of them said like
caffeine free? Oh,
54
oh, well,
grams.
first of all, this is
Well,
no,
no,
this
this
is
isn't
the
caffeine free. I'm sorry, not caffeine free. Sugar free and calorie free. Yeah, no, it's got
this is
caffeine.
sugar free and calorie free. But yeah, caffeine free. I was like, why would you take? I mean,
Yeah, right.
um, you know, sleep is a poor substitute for caffeine. But
This one actually has 5 calories, but the one I had before had zero. But
mm,
yeah, but this is my second one, so hopefully I'll wake up. I really did not sleep very well last night and this morning, so probably because I had a lot of coffee, probably because of the drinking rock stars. But I'll sleep later tonight. But as you guys may have known, I had a blog come out. People that are subscribed to the Great Debate Community website, they get notification when I have a blog. And by the way, yes, I usually make a blog at 3 o'clock in the morning, then I go in and fix all the errors in it. So that's why I call it 3 a.m. philosophy, because I write these things at 3 a.m. So I'm usually dead ass tired and don't know what the hell I'm doing, and it's kind of whatever comes out, and then I kind of fix it all later. But I had a Sye Ten Bruggencate, and I'm probably butchering his name. I know he does say it a little bit.
Sye Ten Bruggencate. Yeah,
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 that's how
yeah.
I say it, but no, he says that's not right. I don't think.
Okay.
But he had messaged me the other day, and I don't know why your Skype is janky, but I don't know. I'll keep fixing it. But he messaged me, and he wanted me to review a video with Tom Jump and a guy named Dr. James Anderson. And it was about 90 minutes, and I can't take 90 minutes of T Jump. So I got about 15 minutes in, and they were talking about a type of transcendental argument for God. Now, I don't know if this was actually Dr. Anderson's argument. It seemed to be. I tried to steel man him as best as possible, but it's kind of hard when he's talking to T Jump, and by the way, T Jump wasn't exactly wrong. I know. I can't believe it, but he wasn't exactly wrong. But he didn't exactly point out why Dr. Anderson's argument for tag was flawed. And that's, if you're going to have an argument on this transcendental argument actually show that God exists, he needs to have a defeater for it. And he really didn't have a defeater per se, but that's what kind of we're gonna talk about is my blog that I wrote last night. So, anyways, are you familiar with the tag? Like, have you listened to Matt Slick, dude?
I no, I want to listen to Matt Slick, and in fact, Modern Day Debates wanted me to debate Matt Slick, and I was just like, I haven't, because Precepts just, I mean, it's not a terrible, Ozzy and I have talked about it a little bit. I'm not sure that it's terribly outside of my wheelhouse or anything, but I don't have a lot of experience with it, so I didn't want to necessarily dive into a debate on it right away. But I did print out your blog, and I've had some thoughts on these kinds of arguments. It doesn't strike me as very different from the ontological argument for God. I think I have sort of the same kinds of objections. But no, I'm not an expert in it. But I printed out your blog. I got a copy of it here, and we can be thrilled to go over it.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're very similar to an a priori ontological type argument. Matt Slick's argument for tag is flawed from the get go. I know I've talked to him about it. I know Dr. Malpass has utterly destroyed him on it, and I know Scott Clifton, aka Theoretical Bullshit, has thoroughly just eviscerated Matt Slick on his version of the tag argument. But this one is a little bit different. This one, I think I've kind of isolated the issue that I have with it. Again, trying to steelman Dr. Anderson the best as possible. But in a nutshell, a tag argument goes along the lines of X is a precondition for Y, and Y exists, then by necessity, X must exist. I guess the simplest way to do a tag argument would be maybe along the lines of I have a thought. Thoughts require a mind, therefore I have a mind. I mean, you can't have a thought without without a mind, right? So if I have a thought, and if as a necessary precondition to have a thought, you have to have a mind. Then if I have a thought, then is by necessity, then a mind exists.
Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that's kind of an easy way to try to explain a transcendental argument. There's different types of transcendental arguments for different purposes. The original transcendental arguments kind of were Kantian to try to figure out how to get rid of skepticism or try to be anti-skeptical, which is the position that knowledge is unobtainable. But we're not going to get into that. I'm just going to dive into this particular argument that Dr. Anderson had. I'm going to throw it up here, but hopefully they can read it. You're going to have to watch it from the outside chat or go to the actual page. But the argument went something along like this, dude.
I was going to put a link to the page, but somebody demodded me. Don't know what happened. It's all right. It's all right. No, it's cool. I understand.
I will add you. I will add you as a mod. You're part of the mod group. You're part of the mod squad. It's just I want to keep it down to bare minimum. I'm trying to have one mod for every 1,000 subs. So I've got 13,000. So when I get 14,000, I can add you. No, I just did it. Well, if people would, maybe throw this link out there and ask people to subscribe a little bit. Maybe get up to 14,000 one of these days. This is not a high moving channel though. I don't get a lot of subs. But all right, so his argument seemed to went something along this lines, and again, he's talking about a transcendental argument using the laws of logic. Now, I know a lot of people have heard that before with like Darwin's deity. He loves these types of arguments. Laws of logic. One of these days, we'll have a video on precept, Nick. One of these days.
We definitely need to. I really want to. I think we should invite back Ozzy for that, because I remember Ozzy really had some ideas on presupposition.
Oh, Ozzy can, he can really eviscerate the precept arguments. But the preceptors aren't around as much as they used to be. And I think one of the reasons is because people like Ozzy, myself, Malpass, Floyd FP, and numerous other people, Jack Angstrike and that group, just, destroyed precept argumentation. And so when that first came around, it was prevalent everywhere. You couldn't go anywhere without having a preceptor come into the Hangout or go into the Discord and start trying to run a precept argument, thinking that it's unassailable and thinking that they've somehow destroyed the skeptic and destroyed the atheist. And it's like, and by the way, back then, a lot of people didn't know how to refute those arguments. They really had some poor rebuttals to the presuppositionalist. And that was kind of what they were going for. To me, they were trolling the atheists who didn't know how to rebuke the presuppositional type argumentation that they're running, because they were very dishonest in their presentations, to say the least. Would you remember those days? Were you around back then?
Oh, no, I easily remember those days. And I think Sye Ten sort of came in at the tail end of those days, but he's still around. I was another one where Sye Ten and I were maybe going to do a debate. But it reminds me a lot of, look, when karate first came out. Like, if you knew karate, you could destroy anybody in a fight. This was in the 70s, 60s and 70s. Yeah. And then everybody understood how karate worked, and it's just like, oh, he's using his feet. That's all. You just, you prepare for that and you're okay. And then, also a lot of ground, Brazilian jiu-jitsu came out. Nobody could deal with that. They just totally owned all the mixed martial arts fights. And then people are like, oh, you're just fighting on the ground. That's all. It's
Drunken monkey
whenever
style.
There's a new thing.
Grappling.
What?
It's all about drunken monkey style. It's all about the grappling. Yeah.
That's for the drunken monkey because
Hmm.
I studied that for a brief period of time. I freaked out a friend of mine. I was like, ah! But yeah, it scares the living daylights out of people. That's all it does. Is once you're used to people slapping themselves and running around
Yeah.
screaming, you're like, okay, this isn't that impressive.
Yeah, once you kind of know the tricks of the trade, the precept argument kind of seems to fall apart. But again, I've seen a lot of people have some really bad refutations of precept argumentation.
Yep.
But what was I going to tell you? I was going to tell you something else, but I completely blew my mind. Oh yeah, we do have Ozzy in the live chat, so hopefully he'll like kind of keep us sane here. Uh, like I said, I'm trying to steel man Dr. Anderson's argument the best I can by listening to what he was telling Tjump. If you think that I didn't get his argument right, then that's fine. Please let me know. I don't want to mischaracterize his argument, but this is what I think he was trying to go for when he was talking to Tjump in that particular video. So
If we have Ozzy on and do just something on presuppositionalism and one show on that, I'll be good for a debate with Sye Ten
this is his
or
winter season. Ozzy does like snow stuff. I was gonna have Sye was gonna come on. I was gonna have Sye come on today, but he wasn't feeling too well, and he's in process of moving, and he didn't have a great internet connection. But he did ask me a question to be answered. Now that question deals with something I put at the very end of this, so I'm gonna save it to the very end, and I'm gonna make Sye Ten Bruggencate watch my entire video, just like I've had to watch his
You are
debates.
so
So if I had to watch Sye Ten's debates, he has to watch my video for me to answer his question. And it's a question. Is really kind of oddly worded, but I will try to steelman his question the best as possible. But we'll get to that. But hey, Sye, I watch your stuff. You got to watch mine. But I get along with Sye. I can't help it. I actually like Sye Ten. I don't know why.
I know you get along. You get
I do.
along
I
with
get
a
along with
lot of
him. I really do.
it's really and you've gotten along with a lot of people. Sye Ten, a couple others that I can think of. It's just like okay, yep.
Well, I
You
mean,
and Messenger
we don't have
feels
to
a
we
bit,
don't have to
a bit
agree on a lot of things. I mean, but
simpatico for a while. Yeah.
he's quite personable. Yeah. But I do remember back in the day when he came on the scene and he was running these presuppositional argumentation debates, and oh man, I was just like, oh, this is kind of cringe. But all right, so let's get into the tag argument that
I was at the seats. Ozzy just confirmed it, but yeah, Ozzy's always hiking. He's like, "Ooh, I like to be outdoors and get exercise."
he's like
Oh my god!
he's like the archetype for the male species for the snowman kind of stuff. He's always out there building igloos and
Oh my
snowshoes
god!
and yeah.
I
So
want to see photos of that. He's got if he has his phone.
he
I'm
had
sure he doesn't
a
take
long
his
time
phone
ago. He
with
had a
him.
video of him how to build igloos. I don't know if he still has it around,
God.
but yeah, he's like professional igloo builder. But so
We
maybe
wanted
he
to have
says
him
maybe next
on in
week.
time to discuss ethics of the Watchmen because we mentioned the Watchmen. We did not normative ethics of Batman and Captain America actually, which is a really interesting.
Well, I
It's
mean, Captain America, that would be a chaotic good.
no, not D&D ethics, normative
Oh, because you're
ethics.
lawful good.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm lawful good.
yeah,
We've got that. That was a pretty good meme. Yeah.
that was brilliant. All right, so let's kind of look over this argument that I think Dr. Anderson was running. And again, if you go watch the video, it was Dr. James Anderson and Tjump. I'm not going to put the link in the video description because it's Tjump. I don't want to force anybody to go watch Tjump, but if you do go watch the video and you think that I got this wrong, I'm happy to append it. Okay, I really am. So, but it seemed to me he was running something along this line. So one, absolute laws of logic exist as metaphysical necessity in all possible worlds, and what he was basically trying to say, Nick, was that logical absolutes must exist in all possible worlds. A equals A, law of not contradiction, law of identity, law of excluded middle. These things in classical logic must exist as metaphysical necessities. Okay?
Yep.
Would you agree that A equals A?
Oh well, I would agree that they are true in all worlds, but I would not agree that they exist in all worlds.
Well, see,
I'll break that too.
I would say if they exist in all possible worlds, they have to be metaphysical. Well, I would say if they're metaphysical necessity, they're required to exist in all possible worlds.
I agree, but I don't think that they're a metaphysical necessity in that sense. I think they're true in all worlds, but only because it's our observation of them that is those laws exist only because any law is what we observe nature to be. It's not prescriptive. So I would agree that as we observe it, that would be true in all worlds. But that doesn't mean that there is something prescriptive that it has necessarily made it true. It just means that that's our observation of the universe. And I think that's going to be very important
Yeah,
later
I,
on.
I definitely agree that there's a fundamental distinction we have between the descriptive and prescriptive, and we'll get into that. But I'm going to grant one because, like 1 + 1 = 2, I think is a metaphysical necessity. I think that exists in all possible worlds. And the way I'm going to describe these, and hopefully I'll get them right, if it's a metaphysical, if you do grant that it is a metaphysical necessity, that must mean that it must exist in all semantic possible worlds. And if it's possible, it must exist in at least one possible world, and if it's impossible, it cannot exist in any possible world. Like a three-sided square cannot exist in any possible world. Okay, that's generally how I understand possible world semantics. So as I've been using these terms, metaphysical necessity, that I mean that to be, it has to exist in all possible worlds. It cannot fail to exist somewhere. In a possible world. Okay. Number 2, laws of logic are non-physical, abstract conceptualizations. And I'm okay with that. I think that the logical, I think we do. I don't think we treat laws of logic as physical things, right? They're not something that has like what's called, I think it's called hypostantiation, where you make something concrete. They are abstract concepts, right? They exist as thoughts. They exist as this is what gets into the description. This is where we're going to go with this. But they are conceptualization and abstract. Numbers are abstract too. And you get into the whole nominalism versus mathematical Platonism, but even then, that's more to me, I think, more of a utility thing. But would you agree that laws of logic are abstract concepts?
Yes.
Okay. By the way, I'm telling you, this is good stuff, people. I'm going to get sponsored by these guys. I'm telling you. That's my whole goal, is get sponsored by Rockstar. So if there's anybody from Rockstar that ever watches this stuff, call me. Okay, so number 3. Concepts exist only in the minds.
Concepts exist only in minds. Yeah.
Okay, and I kind of agree with that too. I don't see how you can have a concept that's independent of mind. I mean, what does it mean to have a concept? It means that you have a mind that's thinking about something. This is why I said, for a transcendental argument, if I have a concept, there's a necessary precondition for the mind to exist, as I see it.
I mean, I'm going to go back to that, because I don't think. I mean, I agree, but I think if you didn't have the mind, the concepts wouldn't. We'll get into it.
Okay.
We'll get into it.
All right, but I think we both agree concepts can only exist in a mind. You have to have a mind to have a concept, right?
Yes, I agree.
Okay.
I agree.
So far, I mean, I'm not having a problem with the deductive argument that he was running. Number 4, a mind must exist in all possible worlds to have the concept of laws of logic. And this is where this is where the argument tries to go, right? That in order to have the concept of laws of logic, the concept has to exist in a mind, because concepts exist in a mind. So if the laws of logic exist in all possible worlds, then there has to be a mind to hold those concepts. This is his argument. Obviously, I think there's a problem with this, but that's where I see his argument going.
Yeah.
Okay. So he's arguing that because the laws of logic exist in all possible worlds, and the concepts exist in a mind, if you had a possible world without humans, you would have to have some mind for those concepts to be in, and those would be what he considered to be 5. That is the mind of God. Now, there's a little bit more complexity to these things about the mind being eternal and absolute and things of that nature for different tag arguments. But this was, I think, was the distilled version of Dr. Anderson's argument.
Yep.
But you read my blog, so did you see the issue that I think I saw in it?
Yeah, you went about it in a very different way than I did, and your issue, I think, was with the latter ones, where mine is a bit. Well, I have an issue with most of these premises, but yes, I hold on 1 second.
My issue was the latter was the equivocation issue that I saw, and the equivocation issue is like, and you had mentioned the difference between descriptive and prescriptive. When I was listening to this, it is, if you just signed, let's say, for example, in my blog, I put A = A for the law of identity, right? That must exist in all possible worlds. That's fine. But the description of that, right, how we describe that symbolically, the A = A as an identity or as an equation or wherever we want to put it as, or that concept that exists, our thought, is describing something that exists in reality, right? So if the fact that a rock is a rock, A = A is something that exists by necessity, that doesn't mean that the description exists by necessity. And that's where I think the equivocation comes in, because he's saying that instead of just saying that the laws of logic, the actual, what they're referring to, the referent, not the reference, but the referent, those exist everywhere, right?
Yes. Yes.
But the concepts don't necessarily do. So you could have a possible world where no mind exists, right? But if you have a rock, that rock is still a rock.
Yes. So for me, I mean, I agree with the equivocation, but for me, it's actually explicitly with the word exist. Now, the original ontological argument, as I understood it, and I know you and I have discussed the ontological argument before, and there's better versions of it, but this is the one, sort of the way I learned it originally, sort of the original classic, which is God is the being to which no greater can be imagined.
You're talking about the maximum great being that Anselm has.
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
That's a modal ontological argument, and that was actually
Yep.
Plantinga's argument. That, if I remember correctly, I think it was Plantinga that was arguing that if God exists and God exists in all possible worlds, then he has to exist in this possible world. In a nutshell, there's like 6
Yeah.
things to it, but
Well, so but the phrasing that I like, because it shows this equivocation. God is the being to which no greater can be imagined. It's greater to exist in reality than in the imagination. Therefore, God must exist. And you're basically sort of trying to a priori define God.
I disagree with you on that, though. I knew you were going to go there. I knew you were going to
know,
go there, and I don't think
I
that
always go there. I know.
you
I know.
always, I don't think the modal ontological argument is trying to just find God in existence. I used to when I first heard it, but then after doing a little more research on it, I think that's actually not fair to say that it's defining it into the existence.
Well, because God is an idea, is a concept, and they're trying to say that because, I mean, I have multiple problems with it, but it's basically trying to say that because this idea would include that it's the best possible idea, and it's better to exist in reality than to just be an idea. Therefore, it must, and you're equivocating on what it means to exist there.
I think the ontological arguments probably going to have to be a whole new episode. So I'm gonna,
Yes,
I'm going to bring it back to tag a little bit, because the modal ontological argument is actually a lot more complicated than people realize. It's not as just simplistic as saying, oh, it's just defining God into existence.
Well, I think it's equivocating on what it means to exist. In this one, absolute laws of logic exist as a metaphysical necessity, and so I'm going to.
Well, I think on this, the equivocation is more the reference to the referent, or the concept to the object that it's pointing to, right? Because if you have a concept, that concept is supposed to be a pointer to reference something that has some kind of ontological reality. And what happens is that reality, that whatever the truth maker is, and they started talking about this a little bit later on, because I jumped a little bit ahead, but they were talking about truth makers and something that's truth bearing to be that what makes a proposition true. And so these truth makers that makes some proposition true, like the statement, A is A, that if you say, A is true, there has to be some kind of ontological truth maker for that. And so that exists independently, whether a mind is there to observe it or not, or to describe it. And so what I think they're conflating is, I think what they're equivocating is, they're looking at A equals A as that symbol, right? As a signifier symbol.
Yeah.
And they're saying, oh, look, okay, we're describing something. I think you're right on that. We're describing something we know about reality. And that description, in order to have that concept, requires a mind. But that concept is not the metaphysical necessity. The object is the metaphysical necessity. And I think that's where the equivocation comes in.
Well, I would completely agree, and that's sort of so absolute laws of logic exist as it depends on what you mean by laws, because laws in science refer to our observations, and so what I would argue is those observations, our observations of what logic is, do not have to exist in every reality. Whatever the universe is, that there may be in every possible world a multiple consistent things throughout it, but we aren't capable of understanding that. We're capable of describing it. That exists, but that exists only in our minds. That doesn't exist in every possible reality. If there are no human beings, it doesn't exist anymore.
Right, but what the object is, what the law of identity is referring to. The veridicality that is something that is truthful with reality, that exists. It does. We don't need a mind for that. We just need a mind to, as I think Audrey had put before, apprehend that, right? We
Yep.
need a mind to understand it. We need a mind to describe it. We need a mind to have a concept of it. But we don't need a mind for that fact of reality to exist.
Well, and that's sort of like, or maybe the equivocation then could be, in my objection, be said to absolute laws of logic, because if by laws of logic they mean, yeah, what's being referenced, that's one thing, versus laws of logic in terms of how we describe what we see. Those are two different things. Laws of logic aren't universal. They are our descriptions of what we see that we believe is
Well, I think they
universal and
are
appears to be
universal.
universal.
I think they are kind of absolute in that regard. I think that, I mean, for example, I can't imagine a possible world where A doesn't equal A. I mean,
Yeah.
so there has to be some kind of uh, metaphysical necessity, because it cannot fail. It cannot not be that way. There's no failure in some possible world for that to be the case where A does not equal A. I don't know what that even means. That couldn't exist in any possible world. That's like saying,
Well,
a three-sided square, because a three-sided square can't exist in any possible world. It's not possible.
but and that's sort of, yeah, I agree with you, but I think that's sort of part of my point, which is that, well, the question is what we're referring to not possible, or what's doing the observation not possible. And I think that's where
I think the
it
reality is
switches.
not possible. Like, what would I mean? It's just not possible to have A doesn't equal A. I don't know what that would actually mean. So that's why they say that these laws of logic are absolute, because they exist in all possible worlds. And there's only three real. I mean, there's actually maybe four, but there's three common laws of logic, which they consider to be law of identity, law of excluded middle, and the law of non-contradiction. But not, a lot of other logics don't have those kind of laws, actually. And like you said, laws are descriptive in science, right?
Yeah.
I think they're descriptive here as well. Most laws are, not all, but most laws tend to be empirical in nature and analytical, such that you can actually express them mathematically. Not all, but most laws you can express mathematically. Law of gravity you can express mathematically. But there's other types of logic that do not use certain laws of logic. Like there's like law of excluded middle doesn't exist in certain types of logic. So this is
So
just class, with regards to classical logic.
there's a troll in the live chat asked a question: why does the fact that our laws of logic describe reality mean that they aren't universal? I don't know who that is, but some mod needs to get on that guy. And so, but that's what my point is. Perhaps let me put it another way, and I can't put it the best, most ideal way that I'd like to, but the closest I can come right now is there's a difference between the language we're using and the reality that we're using that language to describe. If we weren't here, the language wouldn't exist anymore. What we're trying to describe still would. So what I'm trying to say is that what we're trying to describe is universal. Our description of it is not. It requires us to exist. Those are two different things. So, and again, I'm sort of,
No, I
I'll use
agree with that.
language as a,
I
yeah.
agree with that.
So that the language isn't universal. So when I say uh, A equals A, then am I talking about that which I'm referring to, or the language of saying A equals A? That language and that context exists only so long as there are human beings around to say there is a law and it's A equals A. The universe, to the best of my knowledge, and it may, by the way, there may be a lawgiver, a God who sits there and says A equals A, but I don't think that that's
It's
necessary.
that's where I disagree with a lot of the theist arguments. You can have a law of identity and not have a lawgiver to give it. I
Yeah,
mean, I don't see the correlation between because these laws are descriptive. They're not prescriptive, right? If they're prescriptive, they might have a better argument, right? Because if I
yep.
have a law that says, hey, you can't go faster than 35 miles an hour in a school zone, that's prescribing an action. That's prescribing what you need to do, right? It's not just describing anything. It's prescribing. So somebody has to write that law. But these are not laws that somebody has to write. These are just descriptions that we view about reality from our own observations from it. So let's see here. Ozzy says the fact that our language isn't universal, not sure what that means, doesn't seem to imply that the object reference logical truths isn't universal. Yeah, and that's the distinction I was going to make. The object is universal. How we describe it isn't, and this is the conflation that I think the equivocation error here is in the tag argument that he's using. Let me throw it back up if you guys can read that real quick. Is that the object itself that exists in all possible worlds doesn't mean that we have to have a mind to apprehend that, right? I mean, we cannot exist in all possible worlds. We are not metaphysical necessities. There are some possible worlds where we do not exist. There's no life at all. But those laws that they're referring to, the object of those laws, still exist. It's just there's nobody around to describe it. And that's the difference.
Yes.
So that nobody has any language to describe it because nobody's around. There is no language. But if you had a rock, that rock is still going to be a rock in all possible worlds. The rock cannot fail to be anything but a rock.
But you see, and here's why it's relevant.
Or it could
Before I
be
go
other
on,
things, but it
somebody
still
was
has to be a
saying,
rock. Yeah.
Ozzy is a good friend. I was trolling him. He's not trolling me, and I'm not accusing him of trolling me. He's a good friend, and I've given him a hard time because I can, and it's fun. Okay. So absolute laws of logic exist as metaphysical necessities. So here's the thing: the laws of logic are non-physical, abstract, and bingo. So here, I think the equivocation here, in my view, actually is laws of logic. Laws of logic are non-physical, abstract, and conceptualization. So according to two, when they say laws of logic, in my view, they're talking about what's in my mind, not what's out in reality that may or may not have a metaphysical necessity. So
I disagree. I think in two, I think they're talking about the object.
But if the objects are abstract and
well, you're right. No, yeah. So they're talking about you're right because they're talking about the concepts relating to the object. Okay, right, yeah, okay. So the concepts would be the non-physical abstraction and conceptualizations. Those are the laws that we're referring to a description. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, you're right.
Okay, so but then again, okay, that's where this kind of trickery comes in, because in the first one, absolute laws of logic exist as a metaphysical necessity. Okay, they're talking about the object that we are perceiving, and then so in one they're talking about those metaphysical necessities, and then in two they're talking about our minds, and then they're saying, okay, because it's in our minds. Well, it wasn't in number one, so they've done this just a juxtaposition that allows them to then say, this is why, because what we perceive in our minds must necessarily be also this reality. Therefore, this reality must have an ultimate
and that doesn't follow because we don't.
Yeah.
Because there are possible worlds where minds don't exist, but the laws of logic as an object would still exist. But not the concept, obviously.
Yes. Well, and that's also actually almost affirming the consequent in my view, because they're saying, okay, just because even if you would grant that in all cases where, okay, let's hold on a second. I think I just lost my train of thought. Somebody was accusing me of having dad jokes, and it just threw me. I don't know who
we love dad jokes.
I think that's another troll. So let's see. Laws of, I don't know. I throw affirming the consequent in everywhere.
You like that.
I really do.
Yeah. Well, hey, according to Dar's deity, affirming the consequent is a logical rule of inference. I kid you not. He actually argued on one occasion that the argument to consequences, or affirming the consequent, is a rule of inference. And I was like, no, it's not. That's a well-known fallacy. But Ozzy says, laws of logic, the practice of logic is mind-dependent. But the truths of logic, the logical verities, presumably do not need a mind for them to be true. Doing logic needs a mind. Yeah, no, and that's my whole point too. The verities that are absolute and eternal, or the truth makers that exist, or the object, or the referent, whatever you want to use as the terminology, those exist mind independent. They probably don't need a mind to exist. Now, maybe they do, like you said. Maybe there is a God that came up with them, but I don't see a logical necessity to say that the mind is required to have those truths, right? And because even at 5, of course, people are going to argue with 5, the mind is the mind of God. That doesn't get you to any kind of
That doesn't get you
deity,
the God of Abraham.
Except for,
it doesn't get you from little g to capital G.
Right. It just gets you to some mind out there, but what that could mean, who the hell knows? So there's a lot more on this argument to try to get to any kind of Abrahamic type God. But still, I think 5 fails because, my 5 is basically, if this all follows if these are true, but because of the equivocation, it just doesn't mean it doesn't follow. Now, could it be the mind of God? Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to have the fallacy and say, well, the conclusion's wrong because there's equivocation error. That would be the fallacy, but I don't think it shows it the mind of God. And I think that when preceptors go around saying, hey, laws of logic got to have a mind of God, they are conflating a little bit that concept of the law of logic with the actual.
Well, and that's
object
so.
itself.
Is Ozzy disagreeing, or is he agreeing, or is he just being
I
a
think
pain in the
I
neck
think
like
he's
most
being
philosophers?
Aussie. He
Because
never takes a side.
yeah,
Yeah.
so I mean, so the
I
absolute
think he's
laws,
agreeing.
number one, refers to the logical varieties. Ooh, I don't even know how to pronounce that. How
Verities.
many philosophers does it take to mispronounce a word? But the practice of logic is what they're talking about in number two. The practice of logic requires a mind.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
what they're saying is, well, gee, so they're conflating the two. So I think that's where the equivocation
Yeah, to
would be,
do a
in my
lot. Yeah,
view.
well, that's just like even my
Yeah,
blog. I had put like different ways of
yeah,
expressing. For all of A equals A, and A is A, or A equals A. These are all symbolic expressions that refer to the same thing. To do logic like that requires a mind. For me to write that
yes.
requires a mind. But the fact that
And
A equals A, the fact that a rock is a rock, the fact that something is a law of identity, whatever it's referring to, that doesn't need a mind. And that's the whole problem I have with the tag in a nutshell.
yeah.
Oh,
So
Ozzy
for
actually is
three,
agreeing with me for a change. He says, I'm agreeing with Steve on this one. Yay.
yeah, but not me.
I pay Ozzy well.
I think we're saying the same thing, but
I
okay.
buy him off.
Never mind. Fine. Fine.
I buy
I
him off.
totally get it.
I buy him off in big ice cubes so he can make igloos.
Yeah, he didn't come in on this one. He didn't come in on this one because he's scared of me. We all
Yes,
know. We
most
know.
people are.
So and that's why for three concepts, yeah, for three, when they say concepts exist only in the mind, premise two was a concept. Premise one was not a concept. So in my view, so premise three requires premise one and two in order to be useful, but premise one doesn't apply to it because they've equivocated on absolute laws versus the laws in sort of the processing and understanding of those
Let me throw
laws.
this up again real quick. Ozzy, look at the 1 to 5. Does it look deductively valid at least? Because I mean, it seems to be deductively valid. I don't think I have a problem with the validity. I think I have a problem with the equivocation. But can you just read that real quick and see if you see any deductive argument problems? That would be, by the way, what is a deductive argument that isn't actually deductive as it has a formal logical fallacy? That's called a non sequitur. Yes, it is. Kiwasa 5,001. Then how did Tjump try to refute it? Tjump did the same thing that Nick did, which isn't wrong. I mean, he pointed out that there's a difference between descriptive and prescriptive, right? So he was right on that, but he didn't follow through with it to show why that mattered. That was the problem I had with Tjump. He wasn't wrong, but he didn't go far enough. He just said, well, descriptive, prescriptive, okay, so what? He didn't point out the equivocation error. And that's the reason being is because these are descriptive things, and you're trying to say, well, here's some object that exists, here's some truth maker that exists about reality. There must be some kind of prescribed truth, God that makes that to be the case, which they, by the way, they failed completely to argue for that. Dr. Anderson did. But he was going into what makes a proposition true, which is called a truth maker, something that's truth bearing. But so I don't think there was a problem with the logical validity of the argument. But I don't know if Ozzy saw it, so I'll throw it back up just a really quick. I'm wearing contacts today. Yes.
Well, you said it, so I'm sure he thinks it's just fine.
Oh, are you? Ozzy loves to disagree with me. He goes out of his way to find crap. It's like, let me explain to you why I can't do a Canadian Aussie accent. It is like a very low, just mellow. But he always finds things to like, let me show you why you're wrong, Steve. Okay. Yeah. Screw that guy, right? But
God. So and
I just want to know if this.
I
I just want to know if this is logically valid because I had to like, listen to this and then kind of put it down what I thought he was arguing. Okay.
and then whenever you want to get to five, because that's actually one I like how they get from five to from lowercase g to capital G. They always just say capital G right off the bat, and of course,
Right.
what it really is would be lowercase g. But it's clever how they get to capital G from there. It's
Yeah, Ozzy
do.
says some of the premise needs to be more explicit, and I think you're right. Again, this was I even put on here very similar to a priori ontological argument, and went something along the lines of, again, because he didn't really list his argument. I was trying to basically pick apart his argument by listening to him and steelman the best I can. And this is the best I could get out of it. But it seems generally, I'm not going to really attack the validity per se, but it could be a little more explicit in the terminology. But then again, that might be on my behest on my behalf because I I was trying to transcribe it in the best possible way because he and Tjump were going back and forth, and 15 minutes of that was excruciating. I'm not sure what rule of inference would be used either, but But anyways, that's my little criticism on this particular version of tag. I don't find any tag arguments related to God that convincing. I think tag is a great way to argue. I think there are a lot of things you can argue for a really good argument for transcendental arguments, but when you have the transcendental argument for God, I think they all fail for some informal reason here, one or the other, or just like Matt Slick's tag, which is just so mind-bogglingly wrong, and he doesn't get it. He just doesn't understand why his tag argument is bad. You know, the God. If you listen to his tag argument, God or not God.
No, I haven't. Like I said, I'm still reasonably new to. I mean, I know roughly what they are, and I've studied them before, but it's been a long time.
Ozzy said the reconstruction is probably charitable as stated, but not formally valid, and he might be right. Again, I would really have to kind of pick it apart to see if it's formally valid. Ozzy says probably not, which I could probably concede. I would have to probably be a little more verbose in the premises to try to make it more valid. But again, I was trying to be very charitable to Dr. Anderson. Maybe he can actually, if I get a hold of him, try to give me his actual argument premise by premise.
Well, that's a pretty rough construction of how I've seen it, put together before. But again, yeah, it's not intended to usually be just a formal, you just transpose it into, logical notation and see if it's
yeah. Well, I
deductively
put it in there as a
valid.
transcendental argument. It seems to appear to be valid. Now,
Yeah.
again, if it's not, I'm not going to go back and change it. But it seems to be. But if it's not, then I'll take the hit for that. That's probably my fault, not his. But he didn't actually come up with the whole schema of for an argument, and that makes it a little more difficult.
So the one I like, so 5 is the one most atheists jump on that one. And you used a capital G here. It is usually used with a capital G, and obviously this is actually only proof of presumably a lowercase g. To get to a capital G is a huge other bunch of steps. But they always like to sort of shoehorn in that it must necessarily be. I mean, it could just as, that could be. That gets into other arguments like, okay, we're going to say like any kind of prime mover argument, where they're going to say, okay, we're going to say that there must have been something that started it, and whatever that is, we're going to call it God. Now, it could be a giant space hamster that, somehow, defecated the universe into existence. We don't know. We're just going to call it God, whatever you want that to be. And then you say, okay, well, why is that useful? And then what's interesting is people might grant that just because they say, okay, I'm willing to grant it just on prime mover grounds. It's just a higher power of some kind. There's no way to know what it is. And they say, oh, yes, there is a way to know. And the reason why is because that higher power has actually reached out to us. And the way we know that is this book called the Bible. And that's how
I think they kind of jumped the shark on that one.
Yeah, they just yeah. And then they're like, well, don't you believe that higher power would want us to know what it's done? It's like there's no evidence that higher power would even care that we. I made an argument of Michelangelo's garden argument, but that's a whole nother.
Yeah, Ozzy points out something that I had actually pointed out to Sye Ten during a discussion one time. This is a very exact thing that Ozzy noted. He says the difficulty for versions of tag is that they seldom specify why their God is a necessary condition to explain the existence of whatever they are trying to explain. And that's exactly what I asked Sye Ten.
Yeah.
If you want to posit God as a metaphysical necessity, okay, look, there's only so many options, right? There's another argument called the argument from contingency. And the argument of contingency is basically you only have 3 things that I could possibly think of for your options. You have an infinite regression of causality, right? Or you have a regression to the point you have some kind of brute fact, which is a contingency that all contingent things can flow from. Or you have some kind of metaphysical necessity that's a necessary precondition for all these things that are contingent. We're contingent beings, right? So we exist because either A, we have some infinite regress of causality, some brute fact, or some metaphysical necessity. You're kind of limited by the Munchausen trilemma. So if somebody wants to posit a metaphysical necessity is the horn they want to pick, because that's the only one that could possibly, I don't think it does, but possibly satisfy the principle of sufficient reason, because a brute fact, by definition, cannot satisfy principle of sufficient reason. There's no reason for brute fact, right? So can't satisfy PSR. It's kind of self-explanatory.
The antithesis of,
right? It doesn't explain anything. That's why it's a brute fact. And infinite regress doesn't explain anything. So if somebody says, well, my God can explain something because of the principle of sufficient reason, and I'm going to posit this God as a metaphysical necessity, okay, but why this particular God? And why God to begin with? And then the question does seem to be, it raises the question to me, if you do posit God as a metaphysical necessity, why did God create this possible world out of all possible worlds? I mean, he could have chose anything, right? So assuming God had some freedom to choose a possible world, and so this actualized world, and we're going to call it indexical. So possible worlds are indexical. That the world we live in, we are the actualized world. So the world that we're in, the one that God made to be, does it satisfy PSR? No, because we don't know that God was forced to create this world, meaning that something that has value higher than God, that God was beholden to, which seems odd, right? Because he has all these omnipotent powers and insanity, and what's more powerful than God? Why is he beholden to something? And if that's not the case, then it's arbitrary that he just, I'll create this possible world, which means that there's no reason why he created this world. It's arbitrary. That doesn't satisfy PSR either. So I don't think positive God solves anything. It doesn't explain anything to me. And I think that's what I think Ozzy was pointing that out. That doesn't explain anything. Maybe wasn't exactly where it was going, but to me, positing it as a metaphysical necessity, sure, go for it. But does it really answer anything? No, it doesn't. It doesn't explain anything.
Well, yeah, and it's still an assumption. Yeah.
Well, it's a presupposition. Like for example, like Sye Ten, he'll say that God exists as a presupposition. He's fine with that. He'll say, look, I'm presupposing it. Okay. But why? And what does it get you? That's the issue I have. Is would you say, okay, God is that metaphysical necessity that exists? Great. Now what? Why did God create this world? I have no idea. It doesn't explain why this is the actualized world. It just we don't know the mind of God, right? So we have no idea why he created this world.
It doesn't even remotely close get you to the capital G God. It doesn't get you specifically to the God of Abraham. In fact, it doesn't move you even an inch closer to that, really.
Yeah, you could be a pandeist type God. You could be some God that died, and when he evaporated, he became the universe, right? He transformed into the universe. Or he could be some God that said, hey, you know what? I'm just going to create the universe because I like aesthetics, beauty, and I'm going to create the universe because it's nice, and then I'm just going to go do my own thing and wander off. You have no idea, right? You just don't know.
One of the arguments I had made was, okay, look, what if God is a sculptor, and he's got a garden, and he's sculpting all of these statues for the garden, and our universe is one statue that he's made in the garden, and we are less than the little moss that is the bacteria that's growing on the statue, and he doesn't care about us. He maybe doesn't even know we exist. Doesn't really care.
We're an afterthought.
A discarded one. And what?
We're an afterthought.
We're an afterthought, exactly. And he certainly isn't sitting there paying attention to who's doing what and what little. He doesn't care who's killing who over what. He just says, this is a discard, and goes and makes another universe. And there's a billion other universes that he's made, and he's got all his friends over, and he's saying, these are the universes I make in my spare time. I mean, that's just as plausible as any other, Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, when I'm watching the live chat, and there's some, a theist here and there that I don't think they realize how bad their arguments look, right? I mean, look, I call people out of bad arguments all the time, right? And when I have a bad argument, people let me know as well. And I see atheists make very bad arguments. I'm not well liked in the atheist community because I point out to atheists that they make horrible mistakes, right? And they're like, oh, that Steve guy. But when they try to argue with me, they can't show that I'm wrong, right? You ask them for a citation, they go, that's an argument from authority. Oh, piss off, right? I hate that. But you'll see that theists can make just as bad arguments, and they do so authoritative, like, oh, this must be the case. It has to be God. But they never give you a reason why it has to be God as an explanation. Never once. I had Sye Ten. He was shut down when I asked him that question one time. Like, why? Okay, so if I grant you that God is the metaphysical necessity, what does that explain, and why does it have to be God for metaphysical necessity? He just says a precept. Okay, well, that's not an explanation then.
Well, that's almost its own brute fact, really.
It could be. Well, it's not a brute fact in the fact that, brute fact is something where we say that there is no explanation known, or I would argue that it's probably not even knowable, but at least it's outside of our epistemic limit. When we say it's a brute fact, it is something that just, we don't know. We can't know. And so a metaphysical necessity is something that exists in all possible worlds, which we could possibly know. But a brute fact, yeah, I mean, It just,
What,
you can't know it. It's just unknowable, maybe.
that's sort of they're
Or unknown
compounding
at
about
least.
when you're asking them to justify the metaphysical necessity, they're suggesting that the necessity is a brute fact.
Yeah. Well, yeah, they're suggesting it by fiat more. I would say more by fiat or ipse dixit.
That's a much better.
Yeah.
Yes, you're right. You're
Yeah,
right.
because
better.
not really by a brute fact. They're just saying God created it because reasons.
Yep.
So,
no, that's a good point.
So, like I said, Sye Ten asked me a question, and I'm going to answer it for him now. So I'm going to show you guys not what he asked, but my blog.
We should also do the trilemma at some point. That would be another.
Yeah, we could do the Munchausen trilemma, and also Euphrolow's dilemma is always fun. So I put on the very end here. I said, so a rock is a rock holds true regardless if a mind is around to hold that thought of a rock as a rock or not. The laws of logic themselves do not seem to me to require any mind for them to exist. A mind is only required to describe them or apprehend them. I probably could actually put describe or apprehend them because it's kind of both. But so he asked me this question. He said, how do you know that a rock is going to continue to be a rock tomorrow? Now, I'm going to steelman him on this because I don't think he's asking what it sounds like he's asking, because the obvious answer to that is, well, physics dictates that a rock will still be a rock, because you would have to have something happen to affect the rock where it would no longer be a rock, right? So he's asking more about the justificatory reasons, right? He's asking, well, how could you say that the laws of nature are going to be uniform, like the uniformity of nature is going to hold from day to day? How do you know that the laws of logic are going to hold from day to day? How do you know induction is going to work from day to day? That's, I think, where he's going with that question. How do you know the rock is still going to be a rock? How do you know the law of identity is still going to be holding tomorrow? Right? That's his question. And by the way, presuppers love that question. Yeah. Let me tell you the only way I could think of how to answer that question, because I see a lot of atheists make the same mistake when they try to answer this question, because they do this. They say, well, I observed it being a rock yesterday. It's going to be a rock tomorrow. I observed the induction working yesterday. It's going to work tomorrow. Well, there's a problem with that. That's circular. That's begging the question. So the only acceptable answer that I could think of, and if somebody wants to weigh in the live feed, and you can weigh in, the only acceptable answer I can think of is the answer to that question is we don't know. We do it as a faith-based commitment. We do it as an assumption. I assume the laws of logic will work tomorrow. I do it as a brute, just bare assumption that I take as a blind faith commitment. You know, I cannot tell you that I have knowledge that they'll work tomorrow, because I have to use induction to do that. So I cannot justify that the deductive rules of inference will even work tomorrow. Right? I can't justify it. They are unjustifiable. They're unwarrantable. I even wrote a blog on this. This is Hume's problem induction, is that these things are not justifiable. So stop trying to justify them, unless you're some kind of high-end philosopher. And I've seen some people try to do it, papers I've written last year, because in very complicated, pragmatic type arguments, more than just saying, well, we observed it to be yesterday. But I tried to even understand those papers, and they're very, very complicated, so I gave up. But for the average person, the simplest answer is, you know what? We assume it. Ain't nothing wrong with that. I don't know why some atheists have such an aversion to say, yeah, you know what? We just assume it. It's just a faith-based commitment. So what?
Well, you can't possibly operate without assuming it, so might as well just the fact that you have to assume it, because, hey, assume the opposite and see where that gets you.
Right. I mean, you could even function in society if you don't assume that the uniform in nature will be the same. How are you going to even get out of bed in the morning? You were like, what, is there going to be a Florida here to put my feet on? I mean, it would lead to insanity if you try to discount the uniform in nature. So I'm fine with saying, yeah, I assume it, big freaking deal. So what? You're not giving the theist any ground. But a lot of atheists hate to do that. Like, oh, well, that's basically telling the theist that we don't have a justified belief in it. Well, you don't. It's an irrational belief. I don't think it's irrational. I think it's an irrational belief. I believe the laws of logic will work tomorrow as an irrational faith-based commitment. So what? Big deal. I don't see the problem with that. I don't know why some big named atheists have such a big, issue with that. I wrote that blog and I put it in the atheist experience discussion group. And oh my God, all shit broke loose, dude. It was like World War III. And I'm like, and I got to tell you, first I've noticed this, Nick.
Yeah.
Most atheists don't even bother to go past the first line. Right? Half of them right off the bat are eliminated. They don't even read the thing. They see the first line and they try to pontificate on it. They're done, right? I don't even bother with those. The other half read it, and they have the most ridiculous rebuttals that have nothing to do with the actual argument. And by the same thing that the theist is doing here, like in the live chat, going, well, it's God, they're saying, oh, it's justified. Or, oh, I can justify using the rules of logic because they worked yesterday, they'll work tomorrow. Therefore, induction worked yesterday, induction worked tomorrow. And you try to explain to them, that's circular, and they don't get it, right? They just don't get it.
I've had that argument. I try not to have that argument too much because it really ticks off a lot of my atheist friends. They're like,
why?
But I think it's for the same. I think, well, for two reasons. Well, no, one reason, but it's basically the same as the objection I think they have to people who shall remain nameless, who poke holes in lack theism. Same kind of people weren't well liked in atheist circles. I think so. Lack theism is used a lot because it's really easy and it shortcuts what are perceived to be certain problems, and it makes for a very, very easy attack. Arguing that all faith is invalid in some way or another, and you cannot have any faith-based beliefs or else you're guilty of some egregious crime, that argument makes attacking religion very easy. The problem is when religion says, wait a minute, there is one hole in that argument. I still think, we are talking different things. But unless somebody understands that nuance, they're going to sit there, nope, I don't have any faith-based
I don't think
belief.
we are. I hear the word, when I see like a theist using the word faith, I don't, I know it's based on pistis, and I know they mean trust and confidence and stuff like that. But when we talk about these things that we believe, without justification, right? Without warrant, because they're unwarrantable, then they are basically blind. I don't see the difference between that and blind faith anymore. I mean, I had to process this over a period of time, but I had to think about this. It is blind faith. It really actually is, because look, for example, I mean, the whole tag argument, one of the reasons tag was created was actually to try to overcome idealism, right? Skepticism, and especially idealism, that, there are no physical objects outside external to the mind. We can't know whether something's external to the mind or internal. We have to make an assumption. We assume that they're external, but any evidence that an object exists external to the mind is evidence that it's internal. There's no preponderance of the evidence either way. It's just, what do you want to go with? And so my belief that you exist as an independent mind, that my belief that you exist external to my mind, is a faith-based commitment. It's faith.
I agree. I agree it's a faith-based commitment, but I think it's a different kind. And the reason is one cannot operate without assuming that induction, without that faith-based assumption that the laws of nature will be the same tomorrow that they are today. You cannot operate that way. You can operate without the faith-based belief in a higher power that cares. They're two different kinds.
Well, I see your distinction.
I don't have a choice but to believe
okay,
that.
I see your distinction, but let me see if I can word it better for you. I do agree with you.
Please.
One is a properly basic belief, right? The belief that reality exists external to the mind, is to me, is a properly basic belief. God is still a faith-based commitment to, like, Plantinga's Reformed epistemology, but he makes it as a properly basic belief, and I don't think it is. I think it's a basic belief. But he tries to argue that it's a properly basic belief. So you're saying the difference between me having to believe, universally speaking, that all cultures accept that reality exists as a properly basic belief, I'm okay with that as a faith-based commitment. But God, the existence of God, it's still faith if somebody believes it. I don't see any difference there. The distinction to be had is that is not a faith-based commitment, in that it's universal and must be held as a condition for rationality or something to affect your daily life. That's the distinction you're making, and I totally agree with you.
Well, and I know you understand. You agree with the distinction. And it sounds like what you disagree with is that me saying that the terminology or that the concepts should somehow be different. And I think they have to be distinguished, because if they're not distinguished, then I don't know how. I mean, you do that. That's the reason you have the terminology properly basic beliefs. But I think that, as opposed to other basic beliefs, but I think that still is a different kind of. It's not faith if you have no choice in the matter. In my view,
I do have choice. I could choose to say you don't believe you exist, and you're all in my mind. I could choose that.
You could be a solipsist, but you couldn't with induction. So you could not. You have no choice in believing in induction. You would fail to survive as a human being if you did not do that. So I think there's a difference between a belief where there is basically a gun to your head, believe it or, you can't survive.
Well, I'm a agnostic and voluntarist. I don't think we choose our beliefs, but I think that somebody theoretically, I don't see a logical impossibility of somebody saying, well, I believe induction doesn't work, but they, what they would do? They would never leave their bed, right? They would never move.
They'd starve. They couldn't survive.
You couldn't survive, right?
You wouldn't be able, you wouldn't eat.
But that doesn't preclude. But that's not.
Agree,
but that doesn't make it an impossibility, though. I mean, when we're talking about beliefs, it's still a possibility. It's just
I agree, it's a possibility.
Madness.
But you can't function that way.
Right.
You cannot function that way. That you must believe it if you're going to survive. Period. Yeah,
there's
no
I agree
exception
with that.
to that.
Well, that's why I think properly based beliefs, you have to accept them.
Which is why I think it's different than a faith-based, because
no, it is faith-based.
I think.
No, I don't see.
Well, I agree it's faith-based, but that's why I think there still has to be a difference in terminology, because you and I agree, by the way, and I've discussed this before. I don't think beliefs are a choice. So you can't put a gun to my head and say, I want you to believe that the sun is purple.
Right.
It ain't going to work. I'm still going to believe it's yellow. But I am using the terminology slightly differently here. You don't have a choice but to operate on the assumption that induction will continue to work. You don't have a choice in that matter.
I totally agree. I totally agree. I don't think you have a choice if you want to function in society, right? You want to function and be rational. You don't have a choice per se, right? I mean, but I don't see. I think the problem is, like you said, the terminology makes people flip their crap, right? I mean, it's like they hear the word faith-based commitment and they lose their minds. And it's the same thing. Like, remember back in the day where you have these idiots running around going, "Well, I don't have any beliefs." It's like, the hell you don't? Are you an idiot?
You just said like who's I?
Oh my God! When back in the day when I had atheists running around going, "Oh, I don't have any beliefs. I have knowledge," or "I don't hold that belief." This it sounded like logical positivism to the extreme, right? And I'm like, don't do that. You go against a theist and you tell a theist that you don't have any beliefs. You really do like an idiot, right? Because a belief is just a propositional attitude towards something. And in most theories of knowledge, it requires belief. There are some theories of knowledge that necessarily you don't, but justified true belief and other theories that are called belief first for knowledge as a prerequisite, you can't have knowledge if you don't believe it. So I know P, meaning I know that P is true or false. It entails I also believe that P is true. Because I don't know what it would, using something along those lines of a theory of knowledge, I don't know what it would mean to say I know Nick exists, but I don't believe that he exists.
Yeah, there's no way you could have one without the other. That would be meaningless. That wouldn't be meaningless. That would be contradictory in some form or another. It's worse than meaningless. You can't know one thing but believe the opposite.
So Ozzy says, I would be interested in discussion with Nick about the use of the term faith with respect to the properly basic beliefs. I think is an applicable term, and I agree. I think it's an applicable term too. So you and Ozzy there.
We'll have it. We'll do it. But I think that's why atheists have a difficult time, and again, it's the same reason that they have a difficult time with the lacktheism. There's an extra step that if you assume that the atheist also has the burden, that adds an extra step. It adds a couple of sub-steps to it, but it adds one, and they just want to cut it out, and they want to cut that same thing out here, which is I just want to be able to say any faith-based beliefs, any of those are bad without acknowledging that it is a faith-based.
But I think that diminishes the conversation by doing that. I think that what it does is when you take these words away from the theist, like faith and belief, it does take away some of their ammo that they have. But the whole atheist things, that was just ingrained and indoctrinated for years by people, right? I mean, the atheists that didn't understand these concepts, they were like, "Oh, I have to believe this group of people that are atheist activists that are telling me this." But then when they looked into it, they go, "Wow, no, they actually weren't right on this. This is why I have kind of a following. It's because I've been saying for years they were wrong, and instead of just sucking up to them like a lot of non-believers do, I'm not going to play that game. I'm a non-believer, right? I don't believe there's a God, but I'm not going to be that type of non-believer that's a suck up to somebody who's an atheist activist merely because they're saying something to be true, because that leads to dogmatism. That leads to an ideological echo chamber that they have, and people are afraid to tell them that Steve's right. I mean, I'm not going to mention any names, but you go tell some of these atheist activists, by the way, I know philosophy, and by the way, Steve's right on this, and here's 1,000 citations on it. They'll kick your ass out the door, man. They don't care. They don't care. They're just as dogmatic as theists sometimes.
Well, I like it when it's just all they have to say is, Steve was. That's just.
Mention Steve, you get hung up on.
Yeah.
None of them will ever talk to me about it. What's so funny is I never really have, because they I think the reason why they won't is because the very first question I'll ask any of them, if I ever do get a chance to talk to somebody that is an atheist activist on the whole atheism, is what's your references? And I swear to God, I know what they're going to say. Well, the dictionary. Oh,
Well, but you and Ozzy, didn't you and Ozzy do a discussion with, I think it was a producer for whether it was Atheist Experience or something like that. What, didn't you guys do that a
we
while
did one with
back?
Tanjo, who's a mod.
Okay,
She's a moderator,
okay.
and she's really cool. She just invited me to the Atheist Experience Philosophy group. She's the one that actually removed me from the Atheist Experience discussion group and then brought me back. I really like her.
Yeah.
We get along really well. She's willing to listen, and she's willing to take on board this stuff. And I think she's changed the landscape quite a bit of the Atheist Experience discussion group because of that. Because she's no longer arguing that I'm wrong. She's actually telling people, "Hey, look, this is how Steve uses these terms. He's not wrong within the scope of philosophy. He's not wrong as far as the utilization of these words and understanding of these words in the scope of that field. But we're going to use it this way." And I get that. And I'm like, okay, knock yourself out. But there's still a few members occasionally be like, well, Steve, you were born an atheist. And I just cringe, right? I'm like, look, you want to say you were born an atheist because you're using the terminology that way, knock yourself out, right? You can speak for yourself. But isn't it kind of crappy when people speak for other people? Because you'll get atheist activists to say, well, Steve doesn't speak for me. Okay, great. I don't. Don't speak for me either. I wasn't born atheist. You know?
Well, so Kawesa 5001 said George Hamilton Smith was the first to do the implicit atheism. I had always thought it was Bernard Shaw, but I'm not an
No,
expert
George
in
Smith.
that.
He wrote a case against God, and the implicit atheism and the explicit atheism. I have some issues with this terminology, and yeah, he was trying to say that somebody who doesn't explicitly say they hold a belief that God doesn't exist would be an implicit atheist. There's some issues with that because you could actually, if you really thought about it, you could run the same argument saying, well, if you don't explicitly say there is a God, then you're an implicit theist. And I've actually proven this. I actually have a proof on my web blog, www.greatdebatecommunity.com, that weak theism is equal to weak atheism, right? So implicit atheism and implicit theism are the same position logically. It's still, by the way, so is agnosticism. They're all indistinguishable from each other. So if you don't have a belief either way, if you do not have a belief that God exists, and you don't have a belief that God does not exist, you're both an implicit atheist, but you're also an implicit theist at the same time. And that blows people's mind. But they look at my proof and they go, this is just, I swear to God, dude, they'll look at my proof and they go, oh, that's nonsense. I'm like, really? Then why is it that I've had multiple people that understand these topics, PhDs, in logic, and so I say, well, I don't see a problem with it. I mean, if you think there's a problem with the logic, show me where it is, but they never do. Not one.
Just go through it. Just go through it. No, you've got it. You got dead to rights. You've got.
But they never go
the
through it.
the-
I would tell people if you want to attack an argument, start with each premise. Like we know here, we go through each premise, right? We'll see if it's deductively valid or not. That's one of the first steps. If you can show that's not valid by rule of inference that doesn't exist or something like that, it's not some kind of valid rule of inference. You're done. You're good to go, right? I already defeated your argument, right? If you have an argument from argumenting about argument the affirming the consequent, if I can show that, you're already done, right? Because it's a logical fallacy.
Yep,
So any non sequitur, you're game over. But they don't even try to attack it that way. They don't say, well, let me see if there's a problem with the logic. They don't do that first, and then they don't attack the soundness. They don't say, okay, which premise? I'll ask them, which premise is wrong that you don't agree with? Which one's not true? I don't think I've had a single atheist that I can recall ever tell me which premise is not true. They just say, well, this is just nonsense.
Well, that's the point, though. I mean, the conclusion is nonsense if you try to use their terminology. That's why the terminology doesn't.
But that's there on their end, right? I mean,
yeah, no, no, exactly. But that's why that's exactly why I mean, it works to highlight it.
But I mean, in the realm of philosophy, I haven't had a defeater for my argument that weak theism or implicit atheism and implicit theism are not really the same thing. I mean, every implicit atheist is also an implicit theist only by the negation of the proposition, right? Because if you say, look, anybody who doesn't agree that they hold a belief God doesn't exist or God exists, then they are a weak atheist, right? So a weak atheist is somebody who just doesn't explicitly say there's no God, but doesn't say that there is one.
Doesn't deny. Yeah.
Doesn't affirm nor deny. So if you just change the proposition to the negation and say God doesn't exist, if you don't affirm or deny that, then a theist can come along and say, well, you're a weak theist then. And
Yeah, and it's the same.
if
It's
you
the same. Yeah, you end
yeah,
up with the exact same. It's the exact
if you
same
preclude them from
thing.
doing
They're not.
that, that to me, I think is actually a case of special pleading. I really do. I think it's special pleading that if you don't allow the theist to do the same thing that the lack theist atheist has been doing.
That's a good point. That's I think you're right.
Well, I mean, I that's why I have my blog, right? I want people to go read these things and then evaluate them because, again, I look for people that can want to actually challenge me on these things, and I post them everywhere, but I never get anybody do. I've never once had anybody say, "Well, Steve, I disagree with your premise here." Well, why? I would love that, but they don't.
Why, without using any logical fallacies, is what you really mean, Steve, because you're an elitist who thinks that things should be
I'm
logic.
smug.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. Ooh, yeah, I've got
It's
it.
so funny that they
You know,
love that character assassination, right? Well, Steve's right on this, therefore, or he thinks he's right, therefore he's smug. It's never, well, maybe Steve's right on this because he's right on it. It's just that they have to try to character assassinate me by trying to say some kind of smugness or ego thing. It's like, no, this is just, to me, pretty common sense. I mean, if you want to think that it's not, great, but show me why it's not.
still got it.
Yeah. But, hey, Not to Witness showed up. Man, he's been around in ages for a feed or stream. Hi, Nacha. But anyway, so what do you guys think of this so far? I mean, do you guys think that we made a pretty good rebuttal for the tag argument as given by Dr. Anderson, if this is actually a steel man of his argument? Let me know what you think in the live chat there. And Ozzy, what do you think too? Did we do a decent job? Nick, what do you think? What's your summations?
I liked it, but apparently Ozzy's going to be all snooty about it.
Well, he's a
Bertrand
philosopher.
Russell
He's a
was
snob. You know how they all are. Because you're one.
Oh God.
Yeah.
Well, this is I know. Well, that's remember I said
This is
earlier.
Ask
too,
a Philosopher.
a
He's
good philosopher.
he's the philosopher.
Everybody hates.
He actually has a degree in philosophy, so he's.
Yeah, I know he's further. He's a lot further than I am. But
well, yeah,
that's
but you
why I
both
said,
have
though,
degrees in philosophy.
a real philosopher, the way you know you're dealing with a philosopher is because everybody hates them. Their job is to just poke holes in every little thing everybody says. Like, oh,
you know how I know when you're dealing with a philosopher and you ask him, well, what's your position? Well,
yeah.
It's very. I mean, like for example, like Dr. Malpass, right? I love Dr. Malpass, but trying to get him to really pinpoint his positions can be very much of a task. It's very time consuming, you know.
So I got my BAs in philosophy and psychology. My wife just calls them degrees in bullshitting and mind fucking.
That's pretty much what philosophy is. Navel gazing. Now, you know, it's so funny because I was talking to my mom the other day. I went to go visit my mom because I had, yes, my 50th birthday. No, I didn't really much celebrate it. I could have had a big party, but I didn't really want to. I had a nice little stay at home. I, hung out with Sweet Heathen for a while. We had some celebratory wine. That's all I needed. But I did get to see my mom. And, we started talking about philosophy a little bit. And, she was just like, like, when did you ever really get into philosophy? I'm like, well, about 6 years ago, But she was like, surprised because I never thought I would like philosophy. 6 years ago, 7 years, well, maybe about 7 or 8 now.
Well, yeah, you hated it.
I hated. Oh my God, I admit, I was that guy, right? I mean, I wasn't the whole, lack theist kind of thing. I didn't really knew about that kind of stuff. But I was the guy that said, man, philosophy is dull as crap. What the hell's the point? But then I realized over the last, 7 some odd years or whatever it was, that, hey, without philosophy, you want to have logic. You want to have reason. You want to have, the ability to try to apprehend things properly. And I mean, I was in the Navy. I found a letter that I'd written, and I had mentioned something about logic. Because I had taken Boolean logic, and I've taken, and/or gates and TTL and CMOS I knew about. So I understood logic by that type of logic, right? But I didn't understand, what we consider to be like the classical type logic until much later. But I also realized that learning about philosophy helps us think, helps us to reason. And anybody who denies that, anybody who says, well, philosophy is useless, they've just eliminated reason, they've eliminated logic, they've eliminated science, because science is predicated on philosophical backings, right? So, yeah,
that's where it got its start. I mean, philosophy of science was the start of science, and it was people sitting there trying to figure out how they can understand the world. And they were just sitting around contemplating their navel and contemplating how the world works.
And it got complicated, right? Philosophy is not an easy topic.
No.
You try reading some
Well,
of these things, and it's like, wow, not you because you're a philosopher, but some of the people that really think that philosophy is just a bunch of doublespeak. Go read some of these papers and see what you think. It's not as easy as you might think so.
it requires a lot of presence. I think if you're if you with practice, it's not that hard, but it requires presence, and it requires really paying attention to what people are actually saying, and it requires not putting in any assumptions and not just saying specifically point by point what exactly is being said.
Well, I don't have a problem with
And
putting in assumptions if
I
you
like
state the
that. I enjoy that.
assumptions.
So what?
I don't mind having assumptions if you state the assumptions, or at least certain things are assumed regardless, right? I mean,
Well,
when you
that's
go into a philosophical discussion, I don't think many people start off going, let's assume that reality exists. I think that's kind of a
true.
given for most discussions, unless you want to talk about those specific types of areas of philosophy where, let's have some skeptical thinking here where knowledge doesn't exist because there is no reality because it's all, idealistic in the mind or something. Yeah.
When somebody makes a statement, trying not to jump to what you think the inference is to that statement might be a bit more of a better way of putting it. So just sort of taking the statement for what it is and then seeing where they go with it instead of saying, okay, well, this must necessarily lead X, Y, and Z, and just trying to see what they do with it.
Oh, I love
There's
the
a lot of
Socratic
creativity
method.
to it.
Yeah, and I also like thinking, for example, like what if this is the case, then this and that, right? For example, like I'll start off, it is the case that aliens exist or intelligent life exists outside of our planet, or it is not the case, right? Classical logic. It's one or the other. We are either alone in the universe or we are not alone in the universe. There could be no other possibilities, right? This is what logic gets you. This is what critical thinking gets you. Okay, so if we are alone in the universe, what does actually mean? How is it that we are like in the vast universe, the only planet that has life on it, even though, life is based upon carbon and DNA and amino acids and all the stuff that's ubiquitous to the planet that must exist on other planets. Why is life special here? That's, somebody wants to posit a God or some reason why we're here. I see the reasoning behind that, right? I'm not trying to get intelligent design arguments, which again is some kind of tag argument in some ways, but it is weird to think that, hey, look, we might be the only planet that exists with life. What would that mean? But on the other hand, let's say life is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. Trillions and trillions of intelligent civilizations out there. What would that mean? How much knowledge could we gain from them, right? So I like using logic to say, okay, well, it's either one or the other. So just like God exists or he doesn't exist, it's one or the other, There's a reason for we exist or there's not a reason for we exist, But anyways, you guys want to take some questions? We got about, we'll go about another 12 minutes. We'll keep it at 90 minutes. I think that's pretty...
Perfect.
Yeah, perfect. So any last minute questions for Nick or I? Preferably Nick, because I'm all talked out and I'm really caffeinated.
I'm exhausted. Well, you know what? This is where the degree in bullshitting comes in.
Yeah, exactly.
Ask a question,
Just throw
I'll
out some
find a way
big
to-
fancy words.
Yeah.
Just say a priori a lot.
Yeah, it's well, the answer to your question is an a priori metaphysical necessity, which
Analytical.
an analytical brute fact.
Yeah, we'll do the analytical
There you go.
synthetic distinction one of these days, and not the Kantian.
Oh,
he confuses me when he uses synthetic. I don't know. I have my
Well,
own way of
you know,
understanding analytical synthetic, and it's probably way off because you read some Kant and it's like he's not using it the same way. I don't think.
No, he's not, and I should probably actually move off of that. I think it was the first sort of way I understood the synthetic versus analytical, and I've always liked the sort of binary, not the binary, but the very formal synthetic and analytical a priori and a posteriori knowledge, and I don't think it breaks down that easily, but I think I always really enjoyed the simplicity of that view.
Yeah, I maybe I'm off. I just make it real simple. Like an analytical proposition would be something like all married men, all unmarried men are bachelors, right? Even though I've actually put an argument on my blog on a paraconsistent logic to show there can be a married bachelor using paraconsistent logic. But that would be an analytical, right? But a synthetic would be more along the lines of like California is a state in the United States. That's a synthetic, right? That's not an analytical statement. It's a synthetic.
I think if I recall
statement.
correctly, Kant put married men or bachelors actually also in the synthetic. But
he did. Yeah, he did. He put all married. He put married all unmarried men and bachelors as a priori synthetic that he called it. That's what's confusing.
Yep.
But I don't. know why he did. I'll have to have that discussion one day
Because
with
it's just
somebody
the
who knows.
definition of bachelor. That's the problem. Is if that's how we define the word, unmarried men and bachelors are just one thing, but we have a word
Because it's a
defined.
category.
Um,
I think they were using it as something like a categorical type thing. I don't remember.
no, the categorical is something else. But uh,
I don't
I've
remember
got a
why he
question.
called it a priori since
No, it's synthetic
synthetic.
because it's just going based off the definition, which is, the two are the same synthetically. Yeah, we've just defined a married man such that they must be a bachelor. It's not that way because of any
So
natural.
he tries to
Uh,
eliminate the analytical synthetic distinction. Then
yeah.
I don't know. We'll have to have a
So
discussion with him one of these days. I'll have to look more into it. It's been a while since I've looked into that. But to me, like I said, if I use the word analytic, I'm thinking of a statement that is along the lines of, 1+1=2, or all unmarried men are bachelors, and a synthetic would be something more along the lines of, oh, like I said, California is a state in the United States or something. That's the synthetic.
yeah,
It's a truth, right? Synthetic truth.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. That would be synthetic.
but I think Ozzy jumped ship. So, anyways,
Yep, I think he did.
yeah. All right, guys. I don't see any questions out there. I'm surprised. This was actually fun, Nick. I missed doing these Ask a Philosophers, and it's so
Me,
funny too because people wanted
me too.
they wanted to come back of the philosophy. They want to come back on science, and I'm doing more stuff with that. I have Dr. Kroon coming on soon, and I'm trying to save a lot for other things. When we get back non sequitur and stuff. But it's so funny. The other stuff that people were talking about, the like so-called drama stuff, 10 times the views, right? But I don't care about the views. I like doing this stuff so much better. Let other people deal with that drama crap. I mean, every so often it's fun. Don't get me wrong. I think there's some people that get called out, and we will continue to, but it's going to be more on the other channel, the Great Debate Community channel, except for Caffeine Corner, obviously. But I miss this kind of stuff, dude. I miss it a lot.
I missed hanging with you, and I look forward to doing more of it. We gotta just like get a regular time slot and just start doing it. I think that would be
Well, hopefully you'll
spectacular.
find the time. Like I said, I know it's been busy over in time. I know you got a lot of shake up and stuff like that, and more power
Just
to
a
you,
touch.
and more power to Ansgard, and I wish you all both, the very best. As I take over your show, which is going to be very soon.
Yeah,
Hopefully.
you've had your fingers in it. That's what I guess
I
everybody
own
else has figured
everything,
that out.
dude. I have my
I
I
know.
I am just the most manipulative mastermind in the history of YouTube.
I saw a picture. Noel. There was what is
The
it? A
grassy knoll.
fence. You with a rifle on a fence over a grassy knoll. That's what
I
I saw.
I
That.
I I have I have things I can neither confirm nor deny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. So yeah, no, well, there's been a lot of shakeup, but I think we're going to be doing a lot of good stuff. So I hope people will check us out in time. But yeah, it's
Well, I forgot to put the link in
apparently
the video
Steve's
description,
behind
but I
all of
will.
it. I'm really impressed.
I promise that I will put the link in the video description by the time this renders.
Oh, thank you.
Um,
Uh,
so Nick, I want to thank you for dropping by. We'll get you that discussion with Ozzy on the whole faith thing. Because again, I don't see a difference, and again, I don't know why atheists are so against that word. I really don't. But I think it's just they've been ingrained to have certain triggers, and some Pavlovian responses when they hear words like faith or belief, and or by the way, go tell your favorite atheist that atheism and philosophy is the belief that God doesn't exist and watch their head spin.
It's
This
a
is why
troublemaker.
this is why I get
Troublemaker.
kicked out of groups.
Yeah.
All right, man. I will catch you later. I'm gonna finish this caffeinated drink. I'm gonna try to sleep afterwards. So leave me some comments in the video description. What you guys think? If you guys any disagree, agree, whatever. You can keep it on point though. I mean, I like to have people actually look at the argument. The link to the blog is in the video description, so go check it out. If I think about it, I'll put the link to the actual video in there. I guess I probably should, even though it's Tjump's channel. But since I did talk about
I'll
it,
put it in.
yeah, well, I
Put it
mean, I
in.
think that people have a right to go over and actually see if I did justice to Steel Manning his argument. Because if I didn't, please let me know. I'll correct it. I mean, again, it's kind of hard when you're having a conversation between him and Tjump trying to figure out exactly what Dr. Anderson's argument really was. He seemed like a nice guy, though. I mean, so. All right. Sound good?
Yep.
Awesome.
Well, thank you very much for having me again.
All right. Good night, guys. See you tomorrow on Caffeine Corner.